It was a quiet November afternoon in Stamford, Connecticut. Inside her apartment, 32-year-old Annalisa Raimundo was finishing her day, completely unaware that someone she knew had just walked through the door. Moments later, neighbors would report screams. When police arrived, they found the door unlocked, and what lay beyond it would haunt them for years. A brilliant young woman, stabbed, blood everywhere, signs of a brutal struggle. But there was no forced entry, no stolen items, and no clear suspect. But who wanted Annalisa dead, and why? The answer would take years to uncover, and when it finally did, it was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. Annalisa Raimundo was born in 1970 and raised in New York City, surrounded by a loving family and the values of compassion and service. Her parents, immigrants from the Philippines, had built a life grounded in generosity and commitment to others. Her father, a doctor, was devoted not only to his practice in the United States, but also to providing medical care to impoverished regions around the world. Alongside her mother, he strived to be a guiding light for their three children, leading by example and teaching them the importance of kindness, hard work, and purpose. Annalisa, the middle child, quickly distinguished herself. Bright, motivated, and deeply caring, she was the kind of young woman who left an impression on everyone she met. Her academic achievements reflected her determination. After graduating high school with honors, she was accepted into Harvard University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. There, she excelled in her studies, later continuing her education at Columbia University, further reinforcing her reputation as a young woman destined for success. Her career took shape shortly after completing her academic path. Annalisa began working for Purdue Pharma, a prominent pharmaceutical company known for producing a range of medications. The company's headquarters were based in Stamford, Connecticut, and Annalisa made the decision to relocate there to pursue the opportunity. It was a bold move, but one that proved fruitful. Her role offered both professional fulfillment and financial independence. By her early 20s, she had already purchased her own apartment, an achievement that reflected just how far she had come. Life seemed to be aligning perfectly. She had the career, the home, and the future ahead of her looked bright. The only missing piece was love, until she met Nelson Sessler, a co-worker at Purdue Pharma. Nelson was quiet, composed, and reserved, quite different from Annalisa's social and outgoing nature. Despite their differences, a connection began to grow. What started as friendship soon deepened into something more. The relationship remained discreet, especially in the workplace, but behind closed doors, it blossomed. Nelson began spending more and more time at her apartment. To those closest to her, it was clear Annalisa was in love. She imagined a future together and even spoke of marriage. In October 2002, the couple attended the wedding of Annalisa's sister. During the reception, Annalisa caught the bridal bouquet. Many believed it was only a matter of time before Annalisa and Nelson took the next step. But just weeks later, the dream turned into a nightmare. On November 8th, Annalisa and Nelson had plans to meet friends for dinner in Manhattan. The group waited, expecting the couple to arrive any minute. But the evening wore on, and they never showed up. Concern grew as calls to Annalisa's phone went unanswered. Messages were left, assumptions were made. Maybe they were running late. Maybe they'd gotten caught up with work. But the silence stretched on, and it would soon take on a much darker meaning. Earlier that same day, a neighbor had called the police after witnessing a man entering Annalisa's apartment under suspicious circumstances. She had an uneasy feeling, one she couldn't shake. When officers responded to the call, they knocked on the door but received no answer. The door, however, was unlocked. They stepped inside. What they found was horrifying. The apartment was in complete disarray, furniture overturned, items scattered across the floor, and in the hallway, Annalisa's lifeless body lay surrounded by blood. She had suffered multiple stab wounds, and the scene bore clear signs of a violent struggle. Despite her petite frame, it was evident she had fought back with everything she had. Despite the chaos discovered in the apartment, there were no indications of a break-in. The door had not been forced open, and none of her valuables were missing. The scene didn't resemble a robbery, it felt far more personal. Investigators quickly concluded that whoever had entered the apartment had likely been invited in. There was no sign of struggle at the door, no tampering with the locks. Annalisa had opened the door willingly, suggesting she knew the person she was about to let in. The first lead came from the anonymous 911 call that had prompted police to respond. It had been made by a woman. She described seeing a man entering Annalisa's apartment and feared for her safety. But before she could leave her name or any additional details, the call was suddenly cut off. Dispatchers attempted to redial the number, only to discover it came from a payphone located inside a restaurant not far from the building where Annalisa lived. Hoping for a break, officers canvassed the area, questioning restaurant employees and patrons. But no one remembered seeing a woman making a phone call that day. Investigators were left chasing a ghost. With no caller ID, no security footage from the restaurant, and no one able to recognize the voice, the identity of the anonymous tipster remained a mystery. Police went door to door, speaking with every woman in the surrounding buildings, but none admitted to placing the call. Not a single neighbor, friend, or even family member could identify the voice from the 911 recording. The very person who had led officers to Annalisa's body had vanished without a trace. With no other leads, detectives turned their attention to the person typically scrutinized first in such cases, Annalisa's partner, Nelson Sessler. Nelson learned of Annalisa's death when he returned from work and found police officers at her apartment. According to reports, his reaction was strangely subdued. He showed no visible shock, no distress, an emotional detachment that immediately raised suspicions. After all, Nelson had been the last known person to see Annalisa alive. He had spent the night at her apartment and left that morning, making him a key person of interest. But Nelson had what appeared to be a strong alibi. Detectives pulled surveillance footage that confirmed he had exited Annalisa's building early that morning. When he returned after work, he was wearing the same clothes from earlier in the day. No blood, no injuries. And despite the violent struggle that had taken place in the apartment, Nelson had no scratches or marks on his body, something investigators found significant considering the amount of resistance Annalisa had put up. Witnesses at Nelson's workplace corroborated his timeline. He hadn't left the office once during the day. No surveillance footage or witness testimony placed him back at the crime scene during the crucial hours. Still, something felt off. The police continued to view Nelson with suspicion, but there was no physical evidence tying him to the murder, no motive, no forensic trace. They collected dozens of blood samples from the scene, hoping at least one would contain foreign DNA, perhaps belonging to the killer. But every sample tested only confirmed what they already knew. The blood belonged to Annalisa. The few traces of additional DNA failed to match any profiles in existing law enforcement databases. The trail ran cold. 5 agonizing months passed without any progress. Then, on March the 23rd, 2003, a new lead emerged from an unexpected place, 20 miles from Stamford, where Annalisa had once lived. At a local hospital, a man named Paul Christos was rushed into emergency surgery with 3 deep stab wounds to his chest. He had been found in the hospital's parking lot, injured but alive. Several witnesses had seen the attack, prompting staff to quickly intervene. The surgical team managed to stabilize him, and once Paul regained consciousness, he spoke to investigators. He knew exactly who had tried to kill him. According to Paul, the person responsible wasn't a stranger, it was his own wife. Her name was Sheila Davallou. Paul described what began as a seemingly innocent game meant to add excitement to their marriage. It was Sheila's idea. First, she blindfolded herself and had Paul touch her with random household items so she could guess them by feel. Then, it was Paul's turn. As Paul Christos sat blindfolded and handcuffed in what he believed was a harmless marital game, he suddenly felt a sharp, searing pain shoot through his chest. Then, another. Stunned and confused, he heard his wife's voice, Sheila, saying she might have hurt him by accident. Paul, disoriented and bleeding, was unable to comprehend what had just happened. At first, he suspected that Sheila might have fainted or collapsed mid-game, somehow injuring him in the process. But as blood began to pool and the pain intensified, it was clear this was no accident. Despite Sheila's growing panic, driven, she claimed, by her fear of blood, Paul pleaded with her to call an ambulance. He heard her speaking into the phone, believed she was talking to emergency services, and waited. 30 minutes passed. No sirens. No help. Realizing no ambulance was coming, Paul told Sheila to drive him to the hospital herself. It was nearby, just a few miles away. But even then, the situation took another disturbing turn. Sheila couldn't find the key to unlock the handcuffs still binding Paul to the chair. With precious minutes slipping away, the only option left was to break the chair apart so they could make the trip. Once in the car, Paul noticed something else. Sheila drove slowly, cautiously, far too slowly for someone trying to save a bleeding man's life. He begged her to speed up. She didn't. When they finally reached the hospital, Paul expected her to rush him inside. Instead, she pulled into a remote area of the parking lot, far from the entrance, and stopped the car. Without saying a word, she stepped out and walked toward the trunk. Paul assumed she was getting help or grabbing something to support him. But when she returned, she wasn't holding medical supplies, she was holding a knife. And for the 3rd time that day, Paul felt a blade drive into his chest. Sheila attempted to flee, leaving her husband wounded and helpless inside the vehicle. Thankfully, a witness nearby saw what happened and called the police. Thanks to their swift response and the rapid intervention of hospital staff, Paul was rushed into surgery. The wounds were severe, but doctors performed life-saving open-heart surgery. Paul survived. In the aftermath, investigators searched the scene. In the parking lot near the vehicle, they discovered Sheila's phone. It was this device that unraveled her deception. Despite what Paul thought he had heard, Sheila had never called an ambulance. She had only pretended to make the call. In reality, she used that moment to contact someone else, someone named Nelson. Police traced the call and began looking into the man behind the name. Who was Nelson? Why was he Sheila's first call after attacking her husband? As detectives dug deeper, the picture became clearer. The man Sheila had contacted was Nelson Sessler, the same Nelson who had been in a relationship with Annalisa Raimundo, the same Nelson who had been at the center of the unsolved homicide just months before. Suddenly, two violent crimes, once thought to be unrelated, were now linked by one woman, Sheila Davalloo. Who was she really? Sheila Davalloo was born in 1969 in Iran. During the political upheaval of the Iranian Revolution in the late 1970s, her family, both of her parents being doctors, fled the country in search of a safer life. They settled in the United States, where Sheila spent nearly her entire life. Raised in a household that valued education, Sheila thrived academically. Following in her parents' footsteps, she pursued science and enrolled at New York University to study biochemistry. Around that time, she entered into an arranged marriage with a man her parents had selected, but that relationship would not last. While at NYU, Sheila began an affair with Paul Christos, her classmate. Her husband discovered the affair, and the marriage ended in divorce. Sheila remained with Paul, and in 2000, they married. Both found success in their careers and settled in Pleasantville, New York, a picturesque town with easy access to their jobs and a comfortable lifestyle. From the outside, their life appeared ideal, but the cracks were there, hidden beneath the surface. Why had she tried to kill her husband? What connection did she have to Nelson Sessler, and more importantly, to Annalisa? The moment police brought Nelson in for questioning, it all began to unravel. He was shocked to be summoned, confused about how he fit into the investigation. But when he arrived at the police station and learned that the woman who had attacked Paul was Sheila Davalloo, his former lover, the pieces started falling into place. Initially, Nelson insisted they were nothing more than friends, co-workers who had stayed in touch. But as detectives continued questioning, his story began to unravel. Under pressure, Nelson finally admitted the truth. He and Sheila had been lovers. This revelation changed everything. The timeline traced back to the summer of 2001, when Sheila, increasingly disillusioned with her marriage to Paul Christos, met Nelson at work. The connection between them quickly evolved into a passionate affair. Her relationship with Paul had grown cold and distant, more like two people sharing a space than a true partnership. In Nelson, Sheila found an escape. Their affair intensified until Nelson met Annalisa, a woman whose intelligence, warmth, and vibrant spirit quickly captivated him. For a time, he dated both women, uncertain about which relationship would prove lasting. But as his feelings for Annalisa deepened, the decision became clear. By the end of 2001, he chose to end his affair with Sheila and commit to Annalisa. Sheila masked her heartbreak. In front of Nelson, she acted indifferent, as if their romance had meant little. But inside, she was humiliated, enraged, jealous. The man she loved had left her for someone else, and that someone else was Annalisa. After Annalisa's murder in November 2002, Sheila re-entered Nelson's life, positioning herself as a shoulder to lean on during his grief. As others distanced themselves from Nelson, some suspecting his involvement in Annalisa's death, Sheila was the one who remained. Their relationship rekindled. During the interrogation, detectives discovered that on the day Sheila stabbed Paul, she had called Nelson not to confess, but simply to schedule lunch. She claimed the call was to inform him of a sudden change in plans due to an accident involving Paul. Meanwhile, Nelson was still unaware Sheila had a husband at all. She had told him she was divorced, and nothing in her home suggested otherwise. He had spent numerous weekends and nights at her place, never seeing any signs of another man. The truth was disturbing. Sheila had created an elaborate lie to keep both men in her life. She told Nelson that her disabled brother lived with her, and that he was so emotionally unstable she couldn't reveal she was in a relationship. Whenever Nelson stayed over, Sheila forced Paul to vacate the house entirely, taking his belongings with him and sleeping elsewhere. When Sheila was questioned, she stuck to a bizarre story. She claimed Paul's stabbing had been a freak accident, part of a guessing game involving household objects. According to her, the last item was a knife that somehow slipped from her hand. But investigators weren't buying it. Her excuses, already flimsy, collapsed under scrutiny, and she was formally charged with attempted murder. As detectives dug deeper, they grew increasingly certain that Sheila was also responsible for Annalisa's death. The motive was there. Nelson had left her for Annalisa, and the timing was too precise to ignore. One piece of unexpected confirmation came from Paul himself. During an interview, detectives casually mentioned Annalisa's name. To their surprise, Paul recognized it immediately. Sheila had often spoken of a romantic drama involving three fictional people, Jack, Melissa, and Annalisa. She told Paul and others about this supposed love triangle at work. But now it was clear. Jack was Nelson, Melissa was Sheila, and Annalisa was the real woman who had come between them. Sheila didn't just talk about her rivals, she fixated on them. She even told Paul and friends about her and Melissa's plan to break into Annalisa's apartment to learn more about her. She said they wanted to see her pictures, understand who she was. She asked Paul for advice on how to sneak in. Believing he was helping his wife's friend with an imaginary scenario, he offered suggestions and even loaned her his night vision scope. The entire time he was unknowingly aiding his own wife in tracking her romantic rival. Now the puzzle pieces were in place. Investigators believe Sheila had killed Annalisa out of obsession, determined to remove the woman who had stolen Nelson's heart. After Annalisa's death, Sheila saw her chance. But Paul remained a problem. Still legally married, she couldn't be with Nelson freely, and another divorce would have brought shame in her family's eyes. To Sheila, there was only one solution left: eliminate Paul. Still, it was all theory, until the evidence finally surfaced. Among the many blood samples collected from Annalisa's apartment, one had been overlooked: a tiny droplet found on the faucet in the bathroom sink, likely left as the killer washed up after the attack. DNA analysis confirmed what detectives had long suspected. The blood belonged to Sheila Davalloo. Paul also recalled that around the time of the murder, Sheila had a deep gash on her hand. She said it came from a can of dog food. But now it was clear. That injury had likely been sustained during Annalisa's final struggle. With that DNA match, prosecutors had what they needed. An expert in digital forensics also analyzed the mysterious 911 call made the day Annalisa's body was discovered. While Sheila's family and friends couldn't say definitively if the voice belonged to her, voice analysis confirmed it. She had made the call. After killing Annalisa, she had anonymously alerted police, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps to control the timeline of the discovery. In 2007, 5 years after the murder, Sheila was charged. She remained confident, so confident that she dismissed her legal team and chose to represent herself in court. Her trial for Annalisa's murder did not begin until 2012, a full decade after the crime. Paul Christos, her ex-husband and surviving victim, testified against her. Despite her efforts to sway the jury, the evidence was undeniable. After 2.5 weeks of trial, Sheila Davallou was found guilty of murdering Annalisa Raimundo. She was sentenced to 50 years in a Connecticut prison. Already serving a 25-year sentence in New York for the attempted murder of Paul, Sheila would begin serving the additional sentence only after completing the first. In total, she will spend 75 years behind bars, with no chance of release before the year 2079. Her story is one of deception, obsession, and manipulation, a chilling reminder that beneath even the most ordinary facade can lie something far more sinister. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.